For more than half a century, Syria lived under a system built on fear, control, and the heavy hand of one ruling family. The Assad regime, first under Hafez al-Assad and then under his son Bashar, shaped the country into a state where dissent was dangerous and power was absolute. The government survived not through popularity, but through force, intelligence, networks, and the support of foreign allies. Even when war erupted in 2011 and the country fractured into chaos, many believed the regime, battered though it was, would never truly fall. It had endured too long. It had too many backers. It seemed permanent. But history has a way of accelerating when exhaustion reaches its limit. After more than a decade of civil war, Syria was drained. The military was stretched thin, morale shattered, and much of the country reduced to ruin. Assad's forces still held key territory, but the old certainty was gone. Soldiers were tired, the population was broken. The regime remained standing, but it was standing on weakened legs. And in the shadows of this exhaustion, a new figure was preparing to move. Ahmad al-Sharaa was not always known by that name. For years, he was feared under another identity, al-Jolani, a jihadist commander who emerged from the darkest corners of the Syrian battlefield. His roots were tied to extremist movements, and for a time, his faction was seen as an extension of al-Qaeda's vision inside Syria. He was not a politician. He was not a statesman. He was a militant leader in a brutal war where ideology and violence blended together. Yet, as the conflict evolved, so did al-Sharaa. Unlike many commanders who remained locked in rigid extremism, he began to shift. Part of it was survival, part of it was calculation. He distanced himself from al-Qaeda publicly, presenting his movement as more Syrian, more nationalist, less global in ambition. He spoke less of distant jihad and more of governance, order, and stability. In a fractured country where chaos was everywhere, even a militant could claim legitimacy by offering something people were desperate for: control. By the time the Assad regime began its final unraveling, al-Sharaa was no longer simply a commander in the field. He was positioning himself as a leader of something larger, a man who understood that Syria's future would not only be won with rifles, but with power structures. The collapse came faster than anyone expected. A lightning offensive swept through weakened regime lines, exploiting years of fatigue and fragmentation. Assad's army, once feared, was no longer the same force. Its soldiers were exhausted, underpaid, and disillusioned. Years of war had hollowed it out. At the same time, Assad's foreign allies, who had once rushed to his defense, were distracted and overstretched. Russia, Iran, and other backers had their own pressures, their own conflicts, their own limits. The result was a sudden vacuum. Cities that had long been locked under regime control saw the gates swing open. Assad's symbols fell. Prisons that had once held thousands in silence were breached. For many Syrians, it felt unreal. After decades of repression, after years of blood and despair, the regime was finally gone. Crowds poured into the streets, celebrations erupted. People spoke of freedom with trembling voices, as if afraid even to say the word out loud. It was the end of an era, but the fall of a dictatorship does not automatically bring peace. In Syria, it brought something far more complicated: uncertainty. Ahmad al-Sharaa now stood at the center of the new Syria, a man whose rise carried both hope and fear. To some, he was the one who ended Assad's rule, the leader who shattered the old prison walls. To others, he was a reminder that Syria's revolution had traveled through dangerous paths, producing leaders forged in militancy rather than democratic tradition. And the challenges before him were immense. Syria is not one unified piece. It is a mosaic of sects, ethnicities, and regions, each carrying its own wounds and fears. The new leadership immediately faced friction with Kurdish forces in the north, who had built their own autonomous structures during the war. The Druze minority in the south watched carefully, wary of any new ruler who might threaten their fragile balance. Sectarian tensions simmered beneath the surface, and the fear of retaliation, exclusion, or domination hung in the air. At the same time, regional powers moved quickly. Israel, alarmed by the rise of a leader with jihadist history, launched military interventions, striking positions and asserting its own red lines. The Syrian transition was not happening in isolation. Every neighboring state had stakes, fears, and agendas. Syria remained a chessboard even after Assad. Then came the question of governance. Al-Sharaa, once a militia commander, now spoke the language of statecraft. He promised stability, rebuilding, unity, but his vision carried controversy. A new constitution was proposed rooted in Islamic law, raising alarm among minorities, secular Syrians, and international observers. Would this be liberation or simply the replacement of one form of authoritarian control with another? For many Syrians, the joy of Assad's fall was real but fragile. Freedom was celebrated, yet uncertainty crept in. People asked quietly, what comes next? Is this the beginning of a new Syria or just another chapter of power changing hands? The central question surrounding Ahmad al-Sharaa became unavoidable. Can a man with an extremist past truly transform into a legitimate national leader? Can someone forged in insurgency become a governor of a shattered nation? History offers examples of militants becoming statesmen, but it also offers warnings of revolutions that collapse into new forms of repression. Al-Sharaa's supporters argue that he has evolved, that Syria needs pragmatism, not ideology, that stability must come before everything else. His critics argue that the past cannot be erased, that jihadist roots do not disappear simply because a suit replaces a uniform and Syria itself remains broken. The economy is devastated. Infrastructure lies in ruins, millions are displaced. The scars of mass imprisonment, chemical attacks, foreign interventions, and endless bloodshed do not vanish with a regime's fall. Unifying Syria is not simply a political task, it is a generational one. In the end, the story of Syria's sudden transition is not a simple tale of victory. It is a story of how dictatorships collapse, how power vacuums form, and how the men who step into those vacuums carry complicated histories. For Syrians, the celebrations were real, but so were the questions. The Assad regime fell, but Syria's future is still unwritten. Ahmad al-Sharaa stands at a crossroads between two identities, the militant commander he once was and the statesman he now claims to be. Whether he can truly shed the shadow of extremism, unify a fractured nation, and build legitimacy beyond the battlefield will determine whether Syria's next chapter becomes a new dawn or another cycle of turmoil under a different name.